Hey everybody, welcome back to Josh Leoch's video blog. Today we're talking about leasebacks or rentbacks, but they're really called use and occupancy agreements. So stay right here. We're going to learn all about the good and the bad when we come back. All right, welcome back. So you're a seller looking to sell a home and you'd love a buyer that gives you time to stay in your home after it closes. That's called a leaseback or a rentback. You're a buyer looking to really make your offer stand out and you're going to allow a seller to stay in the home. Again, leaseback, rentback. But what these are really called are use and occupancy agreements. Today we have our sponsor and our legal extraordinaire guest, attorney Ariel Sakala with Crowley & Cummings, to talk about this situation. So thank you for being here, Ariel.
Thanks for having me. This is a hot topic right now.
This is a hot topic. We're seeing it happen in a lot of our transactions. We're seeing sellers and buyers both having experience in this arena. And we're seeing good and we're seeing some bad. So what I wanted to do is bring you on to talk about what is a use and occupancy agreement? What does it really need to look like? What are some of the positive situations for both a buyer and a seller? And what are some of the pitfalls that those people need to avoid?
Absolutely. So I'm glad we're talking about this because we are seeing a lot of this being used in the market right now, as you noted. One of the big reasons is because the sellers, they want to sell their homes, but they're afraid, we hear, what am I going to buy? So they don't want to become that buyer that's in the market that has that home sale contingency that they have to sell to buy, because they know that that's not really going to make their offer competitive when they're up against so many other strong offers. So the technique that's being used is what we like to call a use and occupancy agreement. So it allows the closing to happen and then the seller to stay on the property for up to 60 days if the buyer has a lender, because the buyer is going to have a condition of their mortgage that's going to say that they need to take occupancy of the property as their principal residence within 60 days. So that's really the parameter that we're seeing if you're your average buyer. And you noted the leaseback, rentback. So we like to stay away from that language when we actually put it in an offer, even though you hear that term thrown a lot commonly, because we want to distinguish this from the seller having rights as a tenant in Massachusetts. So when we put this into effect, you'll see it in the offer. And then what the attorneys will do is they'll flesh out what's called the use and occupancy agreement to make sure that we're outlining what everybody's rights and responsibilities are during the time that the seller is living there, but the buyer actually owns the property.
Awesome. So I want to look at a seller first. So a seller is selling their home and they're hoping for this situation. And let's say they get this from a buyer. It's offered to them in the agreement. Obviously, there's a positive there, especially if they're building a home and they're waiting for new construction, or they're trying to secure somewhere to go, or they just need extra time to get to their new location, wherever it may be. There's obviously a positive. As a seller, what are some of the pitfalls that can come from this situation by being in a use and occupancy agreement?
Yeah, so one of the things that you're going to see in the actual agreement is that the seller is going to be liable and they're going to release the buyer from any damage or anything that happens on the property during the time of their ownership. So it's not unlike if they still owned the property. So it's basically if there was some type of damage to a system, something failed, they broke something, somebody slipped and fell on the property, the seller is going to be assuming that liability, even though the buyer now owns the property. So a good use and occupancy agreement is going to say, seller, this is on you, and you are not going to go after the buyer or sue them, even though they own the property now. So that can be seen as a pitfall. The other thing that you're going to see is most buyers are going to want the seller to pay them what you might think of as rent, although we again stay away from that word, but it's usually called a per diem rate for the seller's right to use and occupy the property. And that is, the industry standard is for that rate to be equal to the buyer's daily principal, interest, tax, and insurance payment. So basically their whole monthly mortgage payment will break that down by day and then charge the seller for those days. So it's not necessarily a free lunch for the seller. you might have a really motivated buyer who goes, you know what, let's just stay there for free. And then the seller's really enjoying that position.
Yeah, then it would be a free lunch.
Yes, exactly.
So obviously a couple of positives and certainly a few pitfalls or concerns that people need to be aware about as a seller. So let's switch gears. Now I'm a buyer. I've presented this. It's accepted. I fit in the criteria that I'm allowed to give or have the situation for 60 days. What are some of the pitfalls or concerns that I should have as a buyer when faced with this situation?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of these issues kind of crop up now where you've got a seller who doesn't leave on time. They said per the document that they're going to leave on this day. And then I had a situation recently where there was a snowstorm, the moving truck got canceled. So she ended up leaving 3 or 4 days later. Not a huge issue, but it turned out that the buyers were leaving for vacation and it caused quite a bit of inconvenience. We do build into the use and occupancy agreement a penalty that is, if I'm representing the buyer, that's designed to, in this case, the example I was just saying, there was a $300 a day penalty for not leaving on time. So it cost this seller $900 for her failure to leave the property on time. Now, what ended up happening in this situation is there ended up being some issues that came up in those 3 days between the time the seller was leaving and the buyer was taking occupancy, where there was actually the oil tank ran out of oil. The buyers had to get in there and fill the oil tank. So we're in a time of year right now where obviously that we've got snowstorms, we've got windstorms, we've got all kinds of weather happening. So there can be this gray area as to, something happens to the property, whose watch is it on, whose fault is it? You left at this hour, the buyer changed the locks at this hour. And when we have the use and occupancy agreements, we're dealing with a piece of paper. So then when people start to butt heads, even though we try to be really clear and anticipate different situations in the agreement, it can end up in litigation if people are not, if things happen that were not anticipated and people aren't satisfied with what the resolution is. So it can be a little bit sticky. And one way that we try to protect the buyer, and this is something that really should be baked into the offer when the buyer makes the offer, is to have a holdback amount. So in the case I was just talking about, there's a $5,000 holdback amount to make sure that if the seller had up and left on the day they were supposed to leave and left a bunch of personal property behind, damaged the property, now there's a pot of money that we stipulate in the agreement that any of those damages come out of that $5,000 holdback. So that's a really important way to protect the buyer and something that you want to put right in the offer so there's no ambiguity about it.
Very interesting. So based on that, I think, I would be advising agents who work here at our office that if they're going to be presenting an offer with this type of situation that they're going to be having as part of the offer, it's probably best to speak with legal counsel to maybe build an addendum that has really clear wording about this situation, not just seller can stay for 30 days or whatever the case may be. So would you feel that that's sound advice?
That is actually perfect advice, because some of the issues that we're seeing stem from this is because the offer is very vague. And then, what you just mentioned, seller can stay for 30 days. And then when the attorneys get it, I'm trying to say, well, I want a $5,000 holdback. The seller's attorney is saying that wasn't in the offer, so we want no holdback. And then, we're kind of hashing it out at that stage. So if we're really clear from the offer, it also gives the parties, the buyer, a chance to have this conversation with me or their counsel to understand really, what some of the potential risks are and what some things can look like and how we can try to work around those and protect for those.
That's great information, as always. So bottom line, I feel, is that if a buyer or a seller is going to be in a situation where they're either looking for this or it's presented to a seller or the buyer is going to be presenting an offer, to get their real estate attorney involved earlier, sooner rather than later, to ensure that language is correct, the proper protections are in place, and that they're doing it the right way.
Absolutely. And that they understand what the process looks like 100%. I'd say bring the lawyer in at the offer stage, and then we're going to have a much smoother purchase and sale agreement. And then hopefully everyone will be happy at the end.
Awesome. Well, as always, I cannot thank you enough for being here. You always shine a tremendous amount of light on these situations and provide unbelievable knowledge to our consumers, to our agents who are watching as well. So thank you for being here, and we really appreciate you.
Truly my pleasure, Josh. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. If you have any more questions in regards to use and occupancy agreements, you can certainly reach out to Ariel Cicala directly. All her information is going to be in this video before and after as our show sponsor. So reach out to her. She is a wealth of knowledge and certainly our favorite attorney to use in these situations and any situation that we run into. So thank you guys for watching. We hope you had a great show. We hope you learned a lot, and we'll see you next time on Josh Leoch's video blog.